The sirens were still echoing in my ears when I realized I'd spent 63 years preparing for a role that no longer existed. My hands shook as I held the printed email chain, watching red and blue lights paint the community center walls. The police officer's voice was gentle but distant, asking if I needed water, asking if I understood what was happening. I understood perfectly. My family was about to learn that invisibility has a breaking point. 3 months earlier, I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at wedding invitations I wasn't consulted about. My granddaughter Melissa was getting married, and somehow the entire event had been planned without a single phone call to me. The ivory cardstock felt expensive between my fingers. The venue was listed as the Grand Ballroom Downtown, a place I'd never heard mentioned in any family conversation. I ran my thumb over the embossed lettering and felt something cold settle in my chest. I know what you're thinking. How does a grandmother get excluded from her own granddaughter's wedding planning? But here's the thing about being replaced. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not dramatic. It's a slow fade, like a photograph left in the sun too long. One day you're there, vibrant and essential, and the next day you're just this washed-out version of yourself that nobody really looks at anymore. My daughter-in-law, Jennifer, had moved into that matriarch role so smoothly I almost didn't notice at first. She was younger than me by 27 years, energetic in ways I couldn't match anymore. When my son Daniel married her 8 years ago, I was thrilled. Finally, another woman in the family. Someone to share recipes with, to plan holidays with, to pass down traditions to. I didn't see the replacement happening. I saw collaboration, partnership. I saw what I wanted to see because the alternative was too painful to acknowledge. Jennifer started hosting Thanksgiving 4 years back. It made sense. Her house was bigger, she said, and I was getting older, shouldn't have to handle all that cooking. I smiled and brought my famous pecan pie, pretended not to notice when she served a different version as the main dessert, store-bought with that artificial sweetness that coated your tongue. Christmas followed the next year. Then Easter. Then Sunday dinners became irregular, then rare, then non-existent, unless I invited myself. And even then, I could feel it. The slight tension when I arrived, the way conversations would pause and restart on different topics, the sense that I'd interrupted something important. The wedding invitation was just the latest symptom of a disease I'd been ignoring. I set it on my kitchen table next to the others I'd received that week. Birthday party for my grandson Thomas, found out about it from the invitation, not a phone call. Family barbecue next month. Again, invitation only. No. Mom, can you make your potato salad? Request. I was being informed, not included. There's a difference, and it cuts deeper than you might think. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Daniel's number. My finger hovered over the call button. What would I even say? The complaints felt petty in my head. They're planning a wedding without me. They're having gatherings I'm not part of. In the harsh light of day, spoken out loud, it would sound like I was just being difficult, needy, like those mothers-in-law you see in sitcoms, always causing problems, never satisfied. I put the phone down, told myself I was being sensitive, told myself they were busy, that's all. Modern families are different. Everyone has their own lives. I should be grateful they even sent invitations. That's what I told myself. That's the lie I swallowed every single day for years. The doorbell rang, interrupting my spiral. I opened it to find my neighbor Patricia, standing there with her friend, a woman I'd seen around but never formally met. Patricia gestured to her. Helen, this is Grace. She's visiting from Ohio, and I thought you two might have some things in common. Grace was probably in her 50s, with kind eyes that held a weariness I recognized. We made small talk over coffee, the usual pleasantries about weather and travel. But then Grace said something that would change everything. You ever feel like you're just a ghost in your own life? The coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. I stared at her, and she stared back, and I saw that she knew. Somehow, without me saying a word, this stranger knew exactly what my life had become. I see it in your eyes. Grace continued, her voice soft. That look of someone who's there but not really there. I had it for years before I figured out what was happening to me. I should have brushed it off, should have changed the subject. Instead, I found myself talking. The words spilled out like water from a broken dam. I told her about the wedding planning, about the holidays I no longer hosted, about feeling like a guest in my own family, about my daughter-in-law Jennifer, who was wonderful and perfect and had somehow become more central to my family than I was. Patricia excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Grace and me alone at the kitchen table. The afternoon light slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes floating between us. I watched them drift, thinking about how that's what I'd become, suspended in space, visible only when the light hit just right, easily disturbed by the slightest breeze. "When did it start?" Grace asked. I had to think about it, really think. Maybe 5 years ago? Daniel and Jennifer bought that big house in Riverside. It has this huge kitchen, this beautiful dining room. Jennifer loves to entertain. She's good at it, better than me, probably. She makes these elaborate meals, has this way of making everything look like it came from a magazine. And you helped her learn to cook? Well, no, she already knew. She's just naturally talented. Did she ask you for family recipes? I paused. A few times at first, but she has her own style, modern. I didn't want to be that mother-in-law who insists everything be done her way. Grace nodded slowly. So you stepped back. I gave her space to make the family her own. And how much space have you given her, Helen? That question sat between us like an accusation. How much space? All of it. Every inch. I'd stepped back so far, I'd stepped right out of the picture entirely. I'd pruned myself away in the name of not being difficult, not being controlling, not being one of those mothers-in-law everyone complains about. Grace set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Can I tell you about my daughter-in-law? Her name was Amanda. Beautiful girl, smart, ambitious. When my son Marcus married her, I was so happy. I'd raised 3 boys by myself after my husband died, and I finally had a daughter. Her voice caught slightly on that last word, and I found myself leaning forward, drawn into her story. At first, Amanda was wonderful. She'd call me for advice, invite me to lunch, send me pictures of things she thought I'd like. I felt included, valued. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first. She'd forget to copy me on group emails. She'd make plans for family dinners and mention them to Marcus at work, so by the time he got home and told me, it was too late for me to help prepare. She started calling herself Mom to my grandchildren, even when I was in the room. I felt my breath catch. The same thing happened to me. Melissa calls Jennifer Mom sometimes. At first, I thought it was sweet, you know. They have such a close relationship. But then I realized she never corrects herself, never says, I mean Jennifer. Just Mom, like I don't exist. Exactly. Grace's eyes held mine. And when you mention it, what happens? They tell me I'm being sensitive, that it's just a term of affection, that I should be happy they're so close. They gaslight you, Grace said simply. They make you question your own perception of reality. That's how it works, Helen. They need you to doubt yourself because if you trust your instincts, you'd see the pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Patricia returned then, apologizing for the interruption. But the damage, or perhaps the healing, had already begun. Grace had named what was happening to me, had given me language for the vague unease that had been growing for years. We talked for another 2 hours. Grace told me more about her own experience, how she'd eventually confronted her family, how it had led to a year of estrangement before they'd found an uneasy peace. She talked about the guilt she'd felt, the constant questioning of whether she was overreacting, the fear that she was destroying her family by refusing to stay silent. But here's what I learned, Grace said, her voice firm, Staying silent was destroying me. And if I was destroyed, what good was I to anyone? I had to choose myself, even if it meant losing them. In the end, speaking up was the only way to find out if the relationship was real or if I was just a convenient prop in their family play. When Grace and Patricia finally left, I sat alone in my kitchen as evening shadows crept across the walls. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. The wedding invitation still sat on the table, its elegant script now seeming almost mocking. I picked it up again, studying every detail I'd missed before. The invitation listed Jennifer's parents as hosts. Not unusual for a wedding, except that Melissa's grandfather, my late husband, had left money specifically for his grandchildren's weddings. Money I controlled. Money nobody had asked me about. They'd planned an expensive wedding without even checking if I intended to contribute the funds their grandfather had set aside for this exact purpose. That realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just excluding me from planning, they were excluding me from contributing. They'd rather pay for everything themselves than include me in any meaningful way. I was that unwanted, that unnecessary, that easily replaced. Patricia had been quiet until now. "Helen, when's the last time you had lunch with someone who wasn't family?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't. The ladies I used to have lunch with, the book club I'd been part of for 15 years, the volunteer group at the hospital, I'd let all of it drift away. Too busy, I'd told them. Too much going on with family. But the truth was, I'd isolated myself. I'd made my world so small that it revolved entirely around Daniel and Jennifer and the grandkids. And when they didn't need me anymore, when they replaced me with someone younger and more dynamic, I had nothing left. Nobody left. "I don't understand," I said, and my voice cracked. I thought they needed me. Grace reached across the table and took my hand. "That's what they wanted you to think. That's what I thought too, before I realized I was being managed, controlled, kept just close enough to feel included, just far enough away to be irrelevant." Her words were harsh, but they rang with truth. I thought about the pattern. The invitations that came just late enough that I couldn't really participate in planning. The family group chat I'd been added to, but that had somehow evolved into 2 separate chats, one with me, one without. I knew this because my grandson had accidentally sent a message to the wrong thread once, referencing a conversation I'd never been part of. I'd noticed these things, cataloged them in my mind. But I'd explained them away because acknowledging the truth meant acknowledging that my own son was pushing me out, that my daughter-in-law, the woman I'd welcomed with open arms, had taken my place and everyone preferred her version of family to mine. The pain of it hit me then, really hit me, and I started to cry. Not polite tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that embarrassed me even as I couldn't stop them. Patricia and Grace just sat with me, letting me break down in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by wedding invitations to events I wasn't really wanted at. When I finally got myself under control, Grace said, "Helen, I need to tell you something. What's happening to you? It has a name. You're being edged out, systematically isolated and replaced. And the worst part? You're helping them do it by convincing yourself you're the problem." But I don't want to be difficult. Wanting to be included in your granddaughter's wedding planning isn't being difficult. It's being a grandmother. She was right. God help me, she was right. And sitting there in my kitchen, I made a decision. I was going to face this. I was going to stop making excuses, stop diminishing my own feelings, stop accepting crumbs and calling it a feast. But first, I needed to understand just how deep this went. I needed to see the whole pattern, not just the pieces I'd been allowing myself to acknowledge. So I did something I'd never done before. I started documenting everything. I wish I could tell you that realization was enough, that I confronted them the next day and everything changed. But life isn't a movie, and healing doesn't happen in a montage. The truth is, I spent the next 2 weeks feeling paralyzed. Knowing something is wrong and doing something about it are 2 entirely different things. I kept thinking about what Grace had said. systematically isolated and replaced. The words haunted me, especially at night when I couldn't sleep. I'd lie there in the dark, running through memories like film reels, seeing them differently now. Conversations where Jennifer would gently redirect discussions about family history. Times when Daniel would say, "Mom, let Jennifer handle it," about things I'd always handled before. The gradual shift from asking my opinion to informing me of decisions already made. 3 days after that conversation with Grace, I was invited to Sunday dinner at Daniel and Jennifer's house. I almost didn't go. Almost called with an excuse. But I needed to see it with new eyes. Needed to confirm I wasn't just being paranoid or oversensitive. I arrived right on time, carrying a pie I'd stayed up late making. Jennifer answered the door in a crisp apron, looking like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle blog. "Helen, you didn't have to bring anything." Her smile was perfect. Her tone was perfect. The subtle implication that my contribution was unnecessary was perfect too. "I wanted to," I said, holding on to the pie even as she tried to take it from me. A small rebellion, keeping physical possession of something I'd created. Inside, the house smelled like rosemary and roasted garlic. The dining room table was set beautifully, with fresh flowers and cloth napkins. Everything coordinated. The napkins matched the flowers, which complemented the dishes, which harmonized with the tablecloth. It looked like something from a home decor magazine. Professional, impersonal. Nothing like the mismatched comfort of family dinners I used to host, where the emphasis was on warmth rather than aesthetics. My grandchildren were in the living room, absorbed in their tablets. I called out greetings, got distracted, hi grandma responses without them looking up. "Thomas, Emma, come say hello to your grandmother properly," Jennifer called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that perfect balance of firmness and sweetness that made children obey immediately. They came over, gave me dutiful hugs, answered my questions about school with polite monosyllables. But there was a distance there that hadn't existed a few years ago. They were going through the motions, performing the role of loving grandchildren because their mother had instructed them to, not because they genuinely wanted to connect with me. I watched Jennifer watch them, saw the approval in her eyes when they executed their greeting ritual properly. She was training them, I realized, training them to be polite to me, to fulfill their obligations, but not to genuinely engage. I was becoming an obligation to them, a duty to be discharged, not a relationship to be treasured. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, kissed my cheek. "Hey, Mom, how are you?" "Good. Busy with the wedding planning, I imagine?" Something flickered across his face. "Yeah, Jennifer's been handling most of it. She's got such a good eye for these things." "I'd love to help if you need anything. We've got it covered, but thanks." We've got it covered. Not Melissa and her fiancé, not even Jennifer. We. As if the wedding was a project Daniel and Jennifer were completing together, and I was just an observer who'd shown up to watch. I decided to push, just slightly. "Has Melissa chosen her dress yet? I'd love to go with her for the final fitting if she hasn't already done it." Daniel's expression shifted, became uncomfortable. "She found her dress a couple months ago, actually. Jennifer and her sister took her to that boutique in Riverside. It was kind of a girls' day thing." "Oh." I kept my voice neutral, swallowed the hurt. "That sounds nice." "Yeah, Jennifer took pictures. I'm sure she can show you later." Pictures. I could see pictures of my granddaughter trying on wedding dresses, an experience I should have been part of, reduced to photographs I'd be shown out of pity. The evening continued in that vein. Every topic I tried to engage with had already been handled, already decided, already completed without me. The flowers chosen. The menu set. The music selected. The guest list finalized. Melissa's something borrowed, her something blue, her honeymoon plans, the rehearsal dinner location. All of it done. All of it decided. All of it accomplished without a single phone call to ask my opinion or include me in the process. Dinner was delicious. I have to give Jennifer credit for that. She's an exceptional cook. But I watched the way everyone interacted, really watched, and saw the dynamic clearly. Jennifer was the center. Daniel deferred to her. The kids responded to her. When Melissa, my granddaughter, my blood, talked about wedding details, she directed every comment to Jennifer, asked Jennifer's opinion about flowers, about music, about the ceremony itself. I sat at that table, eating perfectly seasoned chicken, and felt like a stranger. An elderly relative they were being polite to, not the woman who'd raised the groom, not the grandmother who should have been intimately involved in this major life event. "Melissa," I said during a lull in conversation, "have you thought about your something borrowed? I have my mother's pearl bracelet. She wore it at her wedding. I wore it at mine. I'd be honored if you wanted to wear it at yours." The table went quiet. Melissa looked at Jennifer, actually turned her head and looked at my daughter-in-law for guidance on how to respond to her own grandmother's offer. Jennifer's smile was warm. "That's so sweet of you, Helen. But we've actually already sorted the something borrowed. My sister is lending Melissa her veil. It's vintage. Absolutely beautiful. I'll show you pictures later." Of course they had. Of course it was already decided, already arranged, already complete without any input from me. I felt that familiar sensation of being unnecessary, irrelevant, replaced by someone who did everything better and more efficiently. I smiled, said, "That sounds lovely." Swallowed the hurt and the anger and the growing realization that this wasn't going to get better on its own. After dinner, while Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing coffee, I tried to talk to Daniel. Just him, father and son. "Danny, can I ask you something?" He looked up from his phone. "Sure, Mom." "Do you feel like I'm too involved in your life? Like I'm overstepping?" His expression shifted, became careful. "Where's this coming from?" "I just want to make sure I'm not being one of those mothers. You know, the kind who can't let go." "Mom, you're fine. Don't worry about it." But his voice had that placating tone I'd heard so often lately. The tone you use with someone you're managing, not someone you're being honest with. I pressed forward anyway. "It's just that I've noticed I'm not as involved with things anymore. The wedding, family events. I feel a bit on the outside." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're not on the outside. You're getting older, that's all. You've earned the right to relax, let other people handle things. Jennifer loves doing this stuff, and it takes the burden off you." Burden. He'd called being involved in my family's life a burden, as if my participation was something they were relieving me of rather than something they were taking away. What if I don't want to be relieved of it? The question came out sharper than I intended. "Mom." Now his tone held a warning. "Don't make this difficult. Everything's fine. You're reading too much into normal family evolution." Family evolution. What a pretty phrase for being phased out. Jennifer came back with coffee before I could respond. The conversation shifted to safer topics. I left an hour later, my untouched pie still sitting on their counter, probably destined for the trash once I was gone. I drove home through streets I'd known for 40 years, and they felt unfamiliar. Or maybe I was unfamiliar now. A ghost haunting my own life, as Grace had said. That image stuck with me. A ghost. Visible but not substantial. Present but not powerful. There but not really there. When I got home, I did what I should have done years ago. I started looking at the evidence objectively. I pulled out my calendar, went back through years of entries, counted how many family gatherings I'd hosted versus how many Jennifer had. The shift was stark. 5 years ago, I'd organized 70% of family events. 4 years ago, 50%. 3 years ago, 30%. Last year, less than 10%. I checked my phone, scrolled through the family group chat. Most messages were just logistics now. Pickup times, schedule changes, brief acknowledgments. The real conversations, the ones with substance and warmth, were happening somewhere else. Without me. I opened my computer, started a document, typed in dates, events, conversations I could remember. The time Jennifer had reorganized my recipe box without asking, declaring my system inefficient. The time Daniel had made major financial decisions about his kids' education without consulting me, even though I'd offered to contribute. The gradual reduction of my role from matriarch to bystander. I spent hours that night documenting everything I could remember. The document grew to 15 pages, single-spaced, chronicling my systematic erasure from the family I devoted my life to building. Each entry felt like a small cut, and by the time I finished, I was bleeding from 1,000 tiny wounds. I documented the Christmas 3 years ago when I'd shown up to find they'd already opened presents without me. "We thought you were running late," Jennifer had said, all apologetic smiles. "We didn't want the kids to wait." Never mind that I'd arrived exactly when I said I would, exactly when they'd told me to come. I documented the time I'd offered to watch Thomas while Daniel and Jennifer went out of town for their anniversary. Jennifer had thanked me but said they'd already arranged for her mother to stay with him. "We didn't want to impose," she'd said. Her mother lived 4 hours away. I lived 20 minutes away. But they'd chosen the inconvenience of distance over the ease of my availability. I documented every family photo posted on social media that I wasn't in, every vacation I wasn't invited on, every milestone I learned about through Facebook instead of a phone call. My grandson's first soccer goal, Emma's school play, Thomas getting his driver's permit. All of it documented on social media, shared with strangers before it was shared with me. The pattern was undeniable when laid out like this. I wasn't being sensitive. I wasn't overreacting. I was being systematically excluded, and the documentation proved it. According to WHO estimates, nearly 16% of seniors in communities suffer abuse every year. I stared at that statistic when I found it during my late-night research spiral. 16%. And here I was, wondering if being pushed aside counted as abuse. It wasn't physical. Nobody was hitting me or stealing from me. But the emotional toll was real, bruising me in ways that didn't leave visible marks. I was one of them, one of those statistics, and I'd been telling myself it was normal family dynamics. The document grew over the next few days. Pages of evidence that my family had decided I was optional, that Jennifer was the better version of what I used to be, and nobody needed the outdated model anymore. But here's what Grace had taught me, what I was finally beginning to understand. Recognizing abuse is only the first step. The next step is admitting that you helped make it possible. And I had. God, I had made it so easy for them. Every time I stepped back to avoid being that mother-in-law, I'd trained them that I was optional. Every time I bit my tongue instead of speaking up, I'd shown them my feelings didn't matter. Every time I accepted their explanations and excuses, I'd given them permission to keep pushing me further to the margins. I'd isolated myself because I was so afraid of being isolated by them that I did their work for them. I thought they needed me. That blind belief had governed every decision I'd made for 5 years. I convinced myself that despite all evidence to the contrary, I was essential to their happiness. That they just needed space right now, but eventually they'd realize they couldn't function without me. That my love and my history and my place in this family meant something irreplaceable. But love isn't protection. History isn't immunity. And meaning something to someone in the past doesn't guarantee you'll matter to them in the future. I'd been living in my own delusion, a comfortable cage I'd built from wishful thinking and denial. The worst part? I'd sacrificed everything else for this delusion. My friendships had withered because I'd stopped prioritizing them. My hobbies had faded because I was always too busy with family obligations that turned out to be optional. My identity outside of mother and grandmother had disappeared because I'd convinced myself that those roles were enough, that they were everything. I called my old friend Margaret, the one I'd had lunch with every Tuesday for a decade before I'd stopped making time. She answered on the 3rd ring, surprise clear in her voice. "Helen, is everything okay?" That's what our friendship had become. She assumed I was only calling because something was wrong, because why else would I reach out after months of silence? "I've been a terrible friend," I said. There was a pause. Then softly, "You've been busy." "That's not an excuse. I cut you out. I cut everyone out except my family, and now—" My voice broke. "Now I don't have anyone." "You have us," Margaret said. "We never went anywhere, Helen. You did." She was right. They'd still been there, still having their Tuesday lunches, still meeting for book club, still volunteering at the hospital. I was the one who'd ghosted them, convinced that family should come first, always first, even when that family didn't want me first anymore. We talked for an hour. I told her everything. She listened without judgment, which was more than I deserved. When I finally wound down, she said, "Come to lunch tomorrow. Tuesday, same place, same time. We've kept your seat warm." I cried again after we hung up. Not sad tears this time, but something else. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or just the overwhelming emotion of realizing I wasn't as alone as I'd believed. The next day, I went to lunch. Walked into that familiar restaurant and saw faces I'd missed without letting myself admit I missed them. They welcomed me back like I'd never left, even though we all knew I had. Even though we all knew I might leave again. But I wouldn't. Not this time. Because I was finally understanding the cost of my choices. I'd pruned away every relationship that didn't revolve around my son's family. I'd cut and cut until my life was barren except for them. And when they didn't need me anymore, I was left with nothing. No support system. No identity beyond the roles they'd decided I couldn't fill anymore. That's what sacrifice looks like when it's rooted in fear. I'd given up friendships, hobbies, independence, all in the name of being there for my family. But they hadn't asked me to give those things up. They hadn't demanded my total devotion. I'd offered it because I was terrified that if I wasn't completely available, completely dedicated, they'd forget about me. The irony was suffocating. I'd made myself forgettable by trying so hard to be unforgettable. I'd become invisible by refusing to exist outside their narrative. I'd lost my place in the family by desperately clinging to it instead of standing firm in my own worth. At lunch with Margaret and the others, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. Not as somebody's mother or grandmother, not as a role to be filled or replaced, but as Helen. Just Helen. With her own thoughts and interests and value that existed independent of anyone else's need for her. "We're going to the art exhibit at the Civic Center next week," Margaret said. "You should come." I started to make an excuse, the automatic response of someone who'd spent years prioritizing family over everything. Then I stopped myself. I'd love to. It felt revolutionary. That simple acceptance. Not checking my calendar to see if it conflicted with anything family-related. Not asking permission or feeling guilty. Just saying yes, because I wanted to go, because these women were my friends, because I deserved to have a life that was mine. But even as I reclaimed these small pieces of myself, the wedding invitation sat on my kitchen table like an accusation. 6 weeks away now. My granddaughter was getting married, and I was just a guest, not involved in planning, not consulted about anything, just expected to show up, smile, and fade into the background like a pleasant piece of furniture. I thought about Grace's words. "When did you become optional?" She'd asked me that question 3 times during our conversation, and I still didn't have a good answer. When exactly had the shift happened? When had essential become expendable? Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it was inevitable. Or maybe it was the natural consequence of training people to treat you as optional by acting like you believed it yourself. I'd stepped back so far, I'd stepped right out of the picture, and now I was surprised to find myself on the outside looking in. The anger came then, finally, burning through the hurt and confusion. I was angry at them for taking advantage of my willingness to disappear. But I was angrier at myself for disappearing so completely, for believing that love meant making yourself smaller so others could be bigger, for confusing sacrifice with self-erasure. I picked up my phone, pulled up the family group chat, and started typing. Then I stopped. What would I even say? I'm upset you didn't include me? I feel replaced. The words seemed childish, whiny, and maybe that's what they'd call them. Maybe that's how they'd dismiss my feelings, the way they'd been dismissing them for years. No. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed evidence, documentation, a clear pattern they couldn't explain away. I needed to see the full picture myself before I could show it to them. So I went back to my document, kept building my case, kept cataloging every slight and exclusion. Some of you might be screaming at your screen right now, telling me to just leave, to walk away from people who clearly don't value me. I understand that impulse. But here's what you have to understand about abuse, even the subtle kind. You don't just wake up one day and realize you're in it. It creeps in slowly, normalizing itself, until you can't tell the difference between love and control, between family and exploitation. And once you're in it, once you've built your entire life around it, leaving feels impossible, terrifying, like stepping off a cliff into nothing. So I didn't leave. Not yet. I documented, I researched, I talked to Grace almost daily, learning from her experience. She told me about her own family, how they'd edged her out in favor of her son's new wife, how she'd felt exactly what I was feeling now. The difference was, Grace had fought back. She'd reclaimed her life, her identity, her power. How? I asked her. How did you do it? I stopped believing their narrative, she said. I stopped accepting their version of reality and started trusting my own experience. And then I found other people who'd been through the same thing, and we helped each other see the truth. That conversation planted a seed, other people, a support network of women who understood, who'd survived this particular kind of erasure and come out the other side. I started researching online, found forums and support groups for people dealing with family estrangement and elder marginalization. Read stories that mirrored my own so exactly it was almost frightening. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. What was happening to me had happened to thousands of other people, and some of them had found ways to fight back, to reclaim their dignity, to make their families see what they'd done. But reading about it and doing it are two different things. I kept hesitating, kept telling myself to wait a little longer, gather a little more evidence, be absolutely sure before I acted. Fear masquerading as caution, keeping me paralyzed, until the day I received the final invitation, my granddaughter's bridal shower, hosted by Jennifer, of course, at Jennifer's house, with Jennifer's friends and Jennifer's family members filling most of the guest list. I was invited naturally, invited to a shower celebrating my own granddaughter, organized by someone else, in someone else's home, with barely any people I knew attending. I stared at that invitation, and something inside me just broke. Or maybe it finally came together. Either way, I knew I couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep accepting these crumbs and pretending they were a feast. I was done being optional, done being managed, done being the obsolete version everyone had upgraded from. I called Grace. "I'm ready," I said. "I'm ready to fight back, but I need help. I need to know I'm not doing this alone." "You're not alone," she said immediately. "You never were. You just couldn't see us yet." She gave me the number for a local support group, women who met twice a month to discuss family estrangement and elder marginalization. I went to the next meeting feeling terrified and hopeful in equal measure. The community center was warm and welcoming. 12 women sat in a circle, ranging in age from early 50s to late 70s. Each one had a story. Each story was different in details, but the same in essence. Families who'd decided these women were disposable, children who'd grown up and grown distant, in-laws who'd taken over roles these women used to fill. The systematic erasure of mothers and grandmothers who devoted their lives to families that no longer wanted their devotion. When it was my turn to share, I told them everything. The words poured out, years of hurt and confusion and anger that I'd been swallowing. They listened without interruption. And when I finished, there was no judgment, no "you should have" or "why didn't you?" Just understanding, just solidarity. The hardest part, one woman said, is admitting that the people who are supposed to love us the most can be the ones who hurt us the worst. Another nodded. And that we help them do it by not believing our own experience, by trusting their gaslighting over our gut. That word, gaslighting. I'd heard it before, but never applied it to my own situation. But that's exactly what had been happening. Every time I expressed hurt or concern, I was told I was overreacting, being too sensitive, imagining problems that didn't exist. Every time I noticed being excluded, I was told it was for my own good, that I was being freed from burdens, that this was just natural family evolution. They'd been rewriting reality, and I'd been letting them, accepting their version of events even when it contradicted everything I felt and observed. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you doubt your own sanity, your own perception, until you can't trust yourself anymore. A woman named Carol spoke up. She was probably 70. With silver hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. My son used to tell me I was remembering things wrong, she said. I'd bring up something that happened, and he'd look at me with this concerned expression and say, "Mom, that's not how it happened. Are you feeling okay? Maybe we should have your memory checked." Several women around the circle nodded in recognition. He did it so consistently that I started to believe him, Carol continued. I made an appointment with a neurologist, convinced I was developing dementia. The doctor ran every test imaginable. My memory was perfect. Better than average for my age, actually. That's when I realized my son was deliberately making me doubt my own mind. It was easier than admitting he was pushing me out of his life. My daughter-in-law did something similar, another woman added. Her name was Diane, and she clutched a tissue in her hands as she spoke. She'd invite me to family dinners at the last minute, then act surprised when I couldn't make it. "Oh, I thought I told you weeks ago," she'd say. "Are you sure you don't remember? Maybe you should write things down." She was making me seem incompetent, unreliable, so that when I complained about being excluded, they could blame it on my failing memory instead of their deliberate choices. The stories continued, each one adding another layer to my understanding. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern, a strategy, a systematic way of erasing older women while making them believe they were the problem. "So what do we do?" I asked. "How do we stop it?" The group leader, a woman named Barbara who'd been through this with her own family 10 years ago, smiled. "We document, we gather allies, we tell our truth, and then we decide what justice looks like for us. Sometimes that's reconciliation, sometimes it's boundaries, sometimes it's walking away completely. But it's always on our terms, not theirs." Barbara shared her own story then. Her daughter had married a man who systematically isolated Barbara from her grandchildren. Every visit became more difficult, more controlled, more conditional. When Barbara tried to address it, her daughter sided with her husband, told Barbara she was being dramatic. "I spent 2 years trying to fix it," Barbara said. 2 years bending over backwards, apologizing for things I hadn't done, accepting blame for their choices. And then one day, my therapist asked me a simple question. "If a friend told you this story, what would you tell them?" And I realized I'd tell them to walk away. I'd tell them they deserved better. I'd tell them that love shouldn't require self-destruction. "Did you walk away?" I asked. "I set boundaries," Barbara corrected. "I told my daughter that I loved her and wanted a relationship, but not on these terms. Not if it meant accepting abuse and calling it family. She had a choice, respect me or lose me. She chose to lose me. For 3 years, we had no contact. It nearly destroyed me. But you know what? I survived. I built a life that didn't revolve around people who treated me as disposable. And eventually, my daughter came back. She apologized. Really apologized, not one of those non-apology apologies where they're sorry you feel hurt, but not sorry for what they did. And we rebuilt, slowly, carefully, on a foundation of honesty instead of obligation. Her story gave me hope, but it also terrified me. 3 years of no contact? Could I survive that? Did I want to? Over the next few weeks, I became part of that group in a way I hadn't been part of anything in years. We shared resources, strategies, encouragement. We helped each other see the patterns we'd been trained to ignore. We practiced setting boundaries, speaking our truth, demanding the respect we deserved. And we documented everything. Every slight, every exclusion, every time our families made us feel small or unnecessary or replaceable. We kept records because we'd learned the hard way that memory isn't enough. That families will deny what they've done, will claim you're misremembering or exaggerating. But documentation is harder to dismiss. My file grew thick. Emails where I was left off chains. Text threads where decisions were made without consulting me. Photos from family gatherings I wasn't invited to, posted on social media for the world to see my absence. Calendar entries showing the steady decline of my involvement over the years. It was damning. It was irrefutable. It was heartbreaking to see it all laid out like that, proof that I hadn't been imagining things, that my hurt was justified, that my family really had been systematically pushing me out. 5 weeks before the wedding, I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront them in person. I'd learned from the other women that face-to-face confrontations with family like this rarely go well. They deflect, they deny, they turn it around and make you the problem. They use your emotions against you, call you hysterical or bitter or jealous. No. I needed something they couldn't dismiss or deflect. Something that would make them see what they'd done, force them to acknowledge the pattern. So I did what I'd learned in my support group. I compiled everything. Every piece of evidence, every exclusion, every example of being replaced and erased, and I wrote it all out in an email. Clear and factual and impossible to deny. It took me 3 days to write. I went through 17 drafts, each time making it less emotional and more objective. Facts instead of feelings. Evidence instead of accusations. I listed dates, quoted conversations, attached screenshots and photos. I showed them exactly what they'd done, point by point, year by year. The hardest part was the ending. What did I want from this? What was I hoping to accomplish? Apology seemed too small. Reconciliation felt impossible. What I wanted, I finally realized, was acknowledgement. I wanted them to see what they'd done, to admit it, to face the consequences of their actions instead of pretending nothing was wrong. I sent the email on a Tuesday morning, addressed to Daniel, Jennifer, and Melissa, copied to my 2 other children who lived out of state and had been more peripherally involved but had still participated in the erasure. The subject line was simple: the pattern you refuse to see. The email began with a timeline, documenting the shift from inclusion to exclusion over 5 years. I included specific examples. November 2020. Last time I was asked to host Thanksgiving. December 2020, first major holiday hosted by Jennifer without consulting me about menu or traditions. April 2021, offered to help plan Easter egg hunt for grandchildren. Told plans were already complete. Found out through Facebook that event had been planned for 3 weeks. July 2021, asked to contribute grandfather's wedding fund money for Melissa's education. Told family would handle it themselves. Later, discovered Jennifer's parents paid for private tutoring I had offered to fund. December 2021, arrived at Christmas at agreed-upon time. Family had already opened presents. Told I was late despite text confirmation of arrival time sent that morning. March 2022, granddaughter Emma's birthday party. Received invitation 4 days before event, after Jennifer's family and friends had already RSVP'd. When I mentioned short notice, was told invitation was sent weeks ago, and perhaps I should check my spam folder. Invitation was dated 5 days before I received it. The list went on for pages, each entry documented, time-stamped, backed up with screenshots or photos, undeniable, irrefutable. I ended the email with a simple statement. I am not asking you to love me. I am not asking you to make me the center of your lives. I am asking you to acknowledge what you have done, to stop gaslighting me, to stop pretending this is normal family evolution, to take responsibility for the systematic way you have erased me from this family while making me believe it was my fault. I deserve at least that much honesty. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. My phone started ringing within an hour. Daniel. I didn't answer. He called 3 more times, left a voicemail that I deleted without listening to, sent texts that I didn't read. Jennifer called next, then Melissa, my other children. The flurry of contact was almost funny. They hadn't called this much in years, and now, suddenly, I was urgently needed. But I knew what this was. Damage control, panic. They wanted to manage this situation before it got out of hand. I let them panic, turned off my phone, went to my support group's emergency meeting because Barbara had said that when you finally speak your truth, you need people around you who won't let you take it back, won't let you minimize your experience, won't let you fall back into old patterns. The women rallied around me, reminded me that I'd done nothing wrong, that speaking truth isn't cruel, it's necessary, that I deserve to have my reality acknowledged, not dismissed. But even with their support, the doubt crept in. What if I'd been too harsh? What if I'd ruined relationships beyond repair? What if this backfired and they cut me off completely? Then you'll know for certain what they value, Grace said gently, and you'll be free to build a life that doesn't revolve around people who don't value you. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are 2 different things. Part of me still wanted them to call back, to apologize, to beg me to come back into the family fold. Part of me still believed that if I just explained it the right way, they'd understand and everything would go back to how it used to be. Except how it used to be was also a lie. Even before Jennifer, even when I was still the matriarch, there had been cracks. Daniel's impatience with my opinions, the grandkids' growing distance, the sense that I was becoming an obligation instead of a joy. I'd just been too blind to see it, too invested in the fantasy of the perfect family to acknowledge the reality of the one I actually had. 3 days after I sent the email, I finally turned my phone back on. 67 messages, 43 missed calls. Part of me felt vindicated. See? I matter. See how much they need me when I'm not available? But the other part recognized this for what it was. Not love, not respect, just panic at having their behavior exposed, their comfortable narrative disrupted. I read through the messages, waiting for an acknowledgement, an apology, any indication that they'd actually heard what I was saying. Instead, I found defensiveness, excuses, claims that I was misunderstanding their intentions, that they were trying to help me by taking over family responsibilities, that I was being ungrateful for all the times they'd included me, all the invitations they'd sent. Daniel's text message was particularly revealing. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this email is completely unfair. We've done nothing but try to make your life easier. If you felt excluded, you should have said something instead of building up this resentment. Jennifer is hurt that you would attack her like this. She's been nothing but kind to you. This is exactly the kind of drama we were trying to avoid by handling things ourselves. There it was, the perfect encapsulation of their gaslighting. My feelings were resentment. My documentation was an attack. Their exclusion was kindness. And my speaking up was drama that justified their decision to exclude me in the first place. The circular logic was maddening. Not a single message acknowledged the pattern. Not one person admitted that maybe, just maybe, they'd been marginalizing me. They'd simply doubled down on their version of reality and expected me to accept it like I always had. That's when something shifted inside me. I'd been hoping for reconciliation. I'd been hoping this would be the wake-up call they needed to see what they'd done. But you can't force someone to acknowledge a truth they're determined to deny. You can present all the evidence in the world, and they'll still find ways to explain it away if admitting it means facing their own cruelty. I called Barbara. "They're not going to change," I said. "No," she agreed. "Probably not. So the question is, what are you going to do about it?" What was I going to do? I couldn't keep living like this, accepting their dismissal, their marginalization, their insistence that my hurt wasn't real. But I also couldn't just walk away, could I? The wedding was 3 weeks away. The invitation still sat on my table, mocking me. I could go, show up like the good grandmother they expected me to be, smile for photos, and continue being invisible. Or I could not go. Make a statement with my absence. Show them that their actions have consequences. But there was a third option, one that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I could go public with this. Really public. Not just an email to family, but something bigger. Something that would force them to face not just my hurt, but the judgment of the community they cared so much about impressing. I thought about it for days. Consulted with my support group. They'd all been where I was, facing the decision of how far to take their fight for acknowledgement. Some had chosen private boundaries, others had gone public. The ones who'd gone public all said the same thing. It was scary, it was risky, but it was also freeing. To stop protecting people who hadn't protected you, to stop keeping their secrets, to let the world see what they'd done. Statistics I'd found during my research haunted me. Studies showed that about 5% of seniors suffer physical abuse, but the numbers for emotional and psychological abuse were much harder to track. Some estimates put it as high as 20%. 1 in 5 older adults experiencing manipulation, isolation, financial exploitation, or emotional neglect by people they trusted. People they loved. People who were supposed to love them back. I was part of that statistic. The abuse I'd experienced wasn't physical, but the bruises were real nonetheless. The damage was real. And keeping silent about it, protecting my abusers because they were family, that was part of what allowed this pattern to continue. Part of what made it so easy for families to discard the women who'd raised them. So I made my choice. I was going to the wedding, but I was going to bring the truth with me. I contacted everyone I knew. Friends, extended family, people from church, neighbors. I wrote a letter, similar to the email I'd sent my immediate family, but more detailed, more specific. I explained the pattern of exclusion. I provided evidence. I asked a simple question. Is this okay? Is this how we treat our mothers and grandmothers? Some people responded with shock and support. Others with silence, unwilling to get involved in family drama. A few sided with Daniel and Jennifer, claimed I was causing unnecessary trouble. But enough people responded with outrage and sympathy that I felt validated. My experience resonated because it wasn't unique. Other women recognized their own stories in mine. The week before the wedding, I sent a final email to Daniel, Jennifer, and Melissa. I told them I would be attending. I told them I would be bringing guests. And I told them that if they wanted to avoid a scene, they might want to actually address the issues I'd raised instead of continuing to ignore them. Daniel called immediately. I answered this time. "Mom, what are you doing? Are you trying to ruin Melissa's wedding?" "No, Danny. I'm trying to get you to acknowledge what you've done to me, what you're still doing to me. We haven't done anything to you. You're the one making this difficult. You're the one causing drama." I sent you documentation, Danny. Evidence, a pattern of exclusion and marginalization spanning 5 years. Can you honestly tell me you didn't do those things? Silence. Then, we were trying to help you. By replacing me? By making every family decision without me? By hosting my granddaughter's wedding without including me in any aspect of the planning? Mom. His voice had that warning tone again. If you make a scene at this wedding, if you embarrass us, there will be consequences. Consequences? Like what, Danny? You'll cut me out of the family completely? You've already done that. You just didn't have the courage to admit it. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Powerful. In control. Refusing to accept their gaslighting, their manipulation, their insistence that my reality wasn't real. The day of the wedding arrived. I dressed carefully, chose my mother's pearls, the ones I'd offered to Melissa that she'd rejected in favor of Jennifer's sister's veil. I met my support group outside the venue. 10 women who'd experienced similar marginalization, who understood what I was doing and why. The grand ballroom was exactly as pretentious as I'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, elegant floral arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Everything perfectly coordinated in blush pink and gold. Jennifer's aesthetic, of course. Nothing of me in any of it. No family traditions. No personal touches that reflected Melissa's heritage. Nothing that acknowledged the 3 generations of women who had come before her. We walked in together. I could see the panic on Daniel's face when he saw us, the confusion on Jennifer's. Melissa looked between us, uncertain. The other guests stared, sensing drama but not understanding its source yet. Jennifer rushed over, her smile strained. "Helen, I didn't realize you were bringing friends." "They're my family," I said simply. "The people who actually value me." Her face flushed. "This isn't appropriate. This is Melissa's day." "Exactly," Grace interjected. "It's Melissa's day, her wedding. Where is Melissa's grandmother supposed to sit? Have you reserved appropriate seating for the groom's mother?" I could see Jennifer's mind working, trying to figure out how to handle this without causing a scene. "Of course we have seating for Helen, but we weren't expecting additional guests." "That's the problem, isn't it?" Barbara said, her voice calm but firm. "You weren't expecting Helen to have anyone. You were counting on her being isolated, alone, easy to sideline. But she's not alone anymore." People were starting to notice. Conversations died as guests turned to watch. Daniel appeared, his face red with anger or embarrassment or both. "Mom, what is this? Who are these people?" "These are the women who saw me when you stopped seeing me," I said. "Who valued me when you decided I was disposable? Who believed me when you told me I was imagining things?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the kind of drama people expected at a wedding. I'd planned to make a scene during the reception, to give a toast that outlined everything they'd done, forced them to face public accountability for their private cruelty. But standing there, seeing the fear in my son's eyes, the anxiety in my granddaughter's, I realized something. I didn't need to destroy them to reclaim myself. Making them pay wasn't the same as making myself whole. And public humiliation, satisfying as it might be in the moment, wouldn't give me back what I'd lost. Wouldn't undo the years of marginalization. Wouldn't rebuild the relationship we'd never really had. Melissa stood near the altar in her white dress, tears starting to form in her eyes. Not tears of joy, but of confusion and fear. This was her wedding day, and it was being overshadowed by family conflict she didn't fully understand. She was a victim in this too, raised to see Jennifer as the primary maternal figure, never taught to value the grandmother who'd been systematically erased from her life. So I made a different choice. I walked up to Melissa, hugged her, told her she looked beautiful. I congratulated them both. I smiled for photos. And then, surrounded by my sisters in solidarity, I left. Just walked out of the wedding before the ceremony even started. Because the most powerful statement I could make wasn't about revenge. It was about refusal. Refusing to participate in my own erasure. Refusing to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. Refusing to be the invisible grandmother in the back of the photos, grateful for crumbs. As we left, I heard Daniel calling after me, but I didn't turn around. Grace squeezed my hand. "You did good," she said. "You chose yourself." The aftermath was chaotic. My phone exploded with calls and messages. Some were angry, some were supportive. Most were confused, wanting to know what had happened, why I'd left. I didn't respond to my immediate family. Let them wonder. Let them sit with the discomfort of my absence. Instead, I focused on the people who'd shown up for me. The women from my support group, Margaret and my other friends. The extended family members who'd read my letter and reached out with their own stories of being marginalized. 3 days after the wedding, the consequences arrived. Not from my family directly, but from the community. People talked. My letter had circulated beyond my initial contacts. The story of what had happened, how I'd been systematically replaced and then had the audacity to refuse to accept it quietly, spread through our social circles. Some people were horrified on my behalf. Others were horrified at me, claimed I'd ruined a young couple's wedding day with my bitterness. But the conversation was happening. People were talking about elder marginalization, about the way families sometimes discard the women who raised them, about the epidemic of loneliness among older adults whose children have evolved beyond needing them. Local media picked it up, a human interest piece about family estrangement and elder abuse. They interviewed me, let me tell my story without editorial judgment. They interviewed other women from my support group. We became a small movement, advocating for awareness and accountability. And that's when the real consequences hit my family. Daniel's business took a hit as clients questioned his character. Jennifer's social media followers dropped as people called her out for replacing her mother-in-law. Melissa's wedding photos, when they were posted, had comments asking where the groom's mother was, why she wasn't in the pictures. They couldn't dismiss it anymore, couldn't gaslight the entire community. The pattern I'd documented, they'd been forced to face publicly, and the judgment they'd been so careful to cultivate over the years crumbled under the weight of evidence they couldn't deny. I won't pretend it felt entirely good. Part of me still hurt for them, still wanted to protect them, even after everything. That's the curse of maternal love. It doesn't shut off just because it's no longer returned. But another part of me felt vindicated, seen, heard, finally believed instead of dismissed. The justice I'd found wasn't exactly what I'd been looking for. They lost reputation, social standing, some business. But they didn't lose everything. Melissa's marriage went forward. Daniel's business survived. Jennifer's carefully curated image took a hit, but recovered eventually. Life went on for them, just slightly tarnished by the truth they'd tried to hide. As for me, I found something unexpected: freedom. Not from them. They still existed, still occupied space in my heart and mind. But freedom from the need for their validation, from the belief that my worth was tied to their inclusion of me, from the exhausting work of making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. The weeks following the wedding were a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I mourned the family I'd thought I had, the relationships I'd believed were real. But I also felt lighter than I had in years. The constant anxiety of wondering if I'd said the wrong thing, done too much, been too present, all of that lifted. I no longer had to perform the delicate dance of trying to be essential while pretending I didn't need to be. I started sleeping better. The insomnia that had plagued me for years gradually eased. My therapist said it was because I'd finally stopped carrying the weight of their denial. I'd spoken my truth, and whether they accepted it or not, I was no longer twisting myself into knots trying to make them see what they refused to acknowledge. I moved 6 months later. Not far, just to a different neighborhood. Found a small house near my support group friends. Started rebuilding a life that wasn't centered around family who didn't want me centered in their lives. The house itself was smaller than what I was used to, but it was mine in a way my previous home had never been. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, without worrying about whether it would impress anyone or fit anyone else's aesthetic standards. bright colors on the walls, mismatched furniture that was comfortable rather than coordinated. Photos of my friends, my travels, my life. Not just endless pictures of children and grandchildren who barely acknowledged my existence. I took art classes, volunteered at the literacy center, hosted dinners for friends I'd neglected for years, built something new from the rubble of what I'd lost. The art classes were a revelation. I'd always wanted to paint but had convinced myself I didn't have time. Now I had nothing but time. And I discovered I was actually quite good at it. Not professional level, but good enough to find joy in the process, to lose myself in color and texture and creation. The Literacy Center gave me purpose. Helping adults learn to read, watching their confidence grow as they mastered skills they'd been denied, reminded me that value doesn't come from family acknowledgement. It comes from what you contribute to the world, from the connections you make with people who genuinely appreciate you. Daniel reached out eventually. A carefully worded email that almost acknowledged wrongdoing without quite taking responsibility. He wanted to talk, he said, to work through things. I considered it, talked to my therapist about it, consulted with Grace and Barbara and the other women who'd become my real family. In the end, I agreed to meet him. But on my terms, in a public place with clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't accept. No more gaslighting. No more dismissing my reality. If we were going to have a relationship, it would be built on truth, not the comfortable lies we'd been telling ourselves for years. That first meeting was awkward and painful. He wanted absolution without apology. Wanted me to accept that what had happened was somehow mutual, that we'd both made mistakes. I refused. Held firm to my truth even when he got angry, even when he threatened to leave. Even when every maternal instinct screamed at me to back down and make peace. But I didn't back down. And eventually, grudgingly, he admitted that maybe they had pushed me out. Maybe they had replaced me. Maybe I had a right to feel hurt and angry and betrayed. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't complete accountability. But it was more honest than any conversation we'd had in 5 years. We're still working on it. The relationship isn't healed. May never be fully healed. But there's a foundation of truth now that didn't exist before. And I've learned to be okay with imperfect reconciliation because the alternative, continuing to pretend everything was fine, was destroying me. Jennifer never apologized, not directly. She sent a card once, something generic about misunderstandings and hoping we can move forward. I sent it back. Not cruelly, just firmly. I wasn't interested in moving forward without acknowledgement of where we'd been. Melissa calls sometimes. Awkward conversations, where neither of us mentions the wedding or what led up to it. I answer because she's my granddaughter and I love her. But I don't pretend we have the relationship we should have had. Don't pretend she's not complicit in what happened. Love and honesty can coexist, even when it's uncomfortable. The other women in my support group, they're my real family now. We meet twice a month still, sharing stories of progress and setbacks. New members join regularly, women who are where I was 2 years ago, just beginning to see the pattern, just starting to acknowledge their own marginalization. I help them the way Grace helped me. Listen without judgment. Validate their experience. Remind them they're not crazy, not overreacting, not alone. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something I wish I'd known years ago when I first started feeling invisible. When the system fails you, and let me be clear, the system often fails older adults, especially women, you have to create your own safety net. The authorities don't always help with emotional abuse. Adult Protective Services is overwhelmed and underfunded. The legal system doesn't have clear remedies for the kind of subtle, systematic marginalization I experienced. Your family doctor might not recognize the signs of elder abuse when they're not physical. Traditional support systems often don't know how to handle these situations. So what do? You find alternative resources, Community groups like the one I joined, online forums where people share experiences and strategies, faith communities that prioritize elder care, local senior centers that offer more than just bingo and craft classes, therapists who specialize in family dynamics and elder issues, legal aid organizations that can help you understand your rights even if they can't directly intervene. You document everything because documentation is power when people try to deny your reality. You take photos, save emails, keep journals. Not because you're planning to sue or confront, but because having evidence helps you trust your own experience when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong. You build relationships outside your family. This is crucial. The isolation that enabled my marginalization happened because I'd made my family my entire world. When they decided I was disposable, I had nowhere else to turn. Don't make that mistake. Maintain friendships. Pursue hobbies. Volunteer. Create a life that has meaning and purpose, independent of whether your children include you. You educate yourself about elder abuse and manipulation tactics. Learn about gaslighting, about financial exploitation, about the warning signs that a family member is trying to control or marginalize you. Knowledge is protection. Understanding the patterns helps you recognize them in your own life before they become entrenched. And most importantly, you trust yourself. When something feels wrong, it probably is. Your gut knows the difference between natural family evolution and deliberate exclusion. Don't let anyone, especially people who benefit from your silence, convince you that your feelings aren't valid. There are resources out there. The National Center on Elder Abuse has a hotline and a website with information. The Administration for Community Living offers programs specifically designed to combat elder isolation. Many states have ombudsman programs that advocate for older adults. Local area agencies on aging can connect you with services and support systems. But beyond institutional resources, find your people. Find other women who understand what you're going through. We're everywhere, though we often suffer in silence because we've been taught that family matters should stay private, that speaking up makes us difficult or bitter. Break that silence. Connect with others. You'd be shocked how many women share your experience, how many are desperate for validation and community. The cost of silence is too high. It's your mental health, your self-worth, your remaining years spent feeling invisible and unnecessary. Speaking up might damage relationships, might cause conflict, might lead to estrangement. But staying silent guarantees you'll lose yourself completely. And you matter. Your experience matters. Your reality deserves to be acknowledged. I'm not saying everyone needs to go public like I did. That's a personal choice and comes with its own consequences. But you do need to speak your truth, even if it's just to a therapist or a support group or a trusted friend. You need to stop protecting people who hurt you at the expense of your own well-being. Recognize it in yourself. Ask hard questions. Am I making excuses for behavior that hurts me? Have I isolated myself from other relationships in service of family that doesn't reciprocate? Do I feel invisible or unnecessary despite giving everything? Am I being gaslit, told my concerns aren't real, or I'm overreacting? Have I noticed a pattern of exclusion but talked myself out of acknowledging it? If you answer yes to any of those questions, it's time to get help. Time to document. Time to find your people. Time to start the hard work of reclaiming yourself. And if you know someone who might be experiencing this, reach out to them. Don't wait for them to ask for help because they've probably been conditioned to believe they don't deserve it. Check in, listen, validate, offer support without judgment. Sometimes, just knowing one person sees us is enough to help us start seeing ourselves again. Thank you for staying with me until the end, for listening to my story without judgment, for allowing me to speak a truth that I kept silent for far too long. I hope something in what I've shared resonates with you, helps you, or at the very least makes you think about the older adults in your own life and how they're being treated. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Are you dealing with something similar? Do you see patterns in your own family that concern you? Or maybe you're someone who's worried they might be unintentionally marginalizing an older family member. Whatever your situation, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment. Share your story. Ask questions. And if this story connected with you, if you felt seen or validated or just less alone, please hit the like button. It helps others find these stories, helps build a community of people who understand that family isn't always what we're told it should be, that love can coexist with harm, and that speaking truth is scary but necessary. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Real experiences from real people navigating complicated family dynamics, abuse, betrayal, and the hard work of recovery. We're building something here, a space where truth matters more than comfortable lies, where validation replaces gaslighting, where women who've been made invisible can finally be seen. I've got 2 other stories you might want to check out after this one. One about a woman whose adult children financially exploited her for years before she fought back. Another about recognizing the early warning signs of family estrangement before it becomes irreversible.